amendments?
Yes, the Legislative Council has seen fit to offer some suggestions to the House as to how they think that the bill that the House recommended to them might be amended, and we have a slightly different point of view, but in the interests of understanding the important position held by the members of the Legislative Council and taking on board the wisdom of the members of the Teachers Registration Board administration who have given further reflection on the amendments from the LegCo. The government is going to propose, I suppose you could call it a compromise, a new set of amendments in relation to some of their suggestions. We're going to agree with at least one of their amendments, and we're going to recommend, we're going to seek that the House recommend to the Legislative Council that they not pursue others. And I would suggest perhaps the easiest thing is if we just go through the amendments one by one.
Certainly.
We should move firstly that the House disagrees to amendment number 1 and makes the alternative amendment in lieu thereof.
Right. So, Minister, I'm advised that you should move that we disagree as a House with the amendment made by the Legislative Council, and at the same time
for further suggestions
to number 1, and then move the alternate amendment.
Thank you, sir. I move that the House, in relation to amendment number 1, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council and makes a following amendment in lieu thereof, that being the one that is tabled in my name, and I trust that I don't need to read it out. Amendment number 1, made by the Legislative Council, seeks to modify the proposed changes to the composition of the Teachers Registration Board in Clause 7 of the bill. It proposes to retain the current situation in the Teachers Registration and Standards Act, whereby members of the board are appointed by the Governor on the nomination of various stakeholders, including teacher unions, universities, the independent and Catholic school sectors, the Chief Executive and the Minister. The Government disagrees with this amendment. The Government's bill set out changes that ensure that members of the Board are appointed based on the knowledge, skills and experience required for the Board to carry out its functions effectively, moving away from the Board membership being based solely on the nominations of representative bodies. However, in the interest of ensuring the passage of the bill, the Government is proposing an alternative amendment that will ensure that the Board will consist of between 10 and 14 members appointed by the Governor, as identified previously, but that at least 6 of the members must be practising teachers, of whom 4 must be nominated by the Australian Education Union, including 1 practising in each of the areas of preschool, primary and secondary education, including at least 1 practising, that should be in each of the areas of preschool, primary and secondary education, and 2 must be nominated by the Independent Education Union. The remaining members will be nominated by the Minister, but will include at least 1 legal practitioner and 1 parent of a school student appointed to represent the community interest. In addition, at least half of the members of the Board must be registered teachers. I believe that this amendment captures the concern that was raised by most of the people who raised concerns with the bill, particularly teachers who are concerned that while even if there was to be merit in a skills-based board, which the Government certainly believes so, the concern was that given that it is teachers' money for the benefit of teachers, that it should be a board that reflects the voice of teachers very strongly, and we are willing to guarantee that 6 of those positions indeed are directly nominated by the unions as set out.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. And given I don't intend on making any third reading contributions should we get that far, which I'm sure we will, I might just take this opportunity to make a few comments about the process we have gone through with the Minister in the intervening period and the amendment before us. And I would like to start by thanking the Minister for I think it's fair to say, the collaborative way that he has approached this with both the member for Port Adelaide and myself. That has been refreshing, particularly I think as a newly minted Shadow Minister who, on the first day after the opposition announced its reshuffle, received a call from the Minister which was greatly appreciated, and he told me that was what he received from the member for Port Adelaide when he took the portfolio as well. So I think that's a nice tradition that we have kept going there, and I would like to place on the record my thanks to the Minister for involving me in this in a genuine and collaborative way. So Amendment 1, as the Minister has already pointed out, deals with the composition of the board, and there was in the first iteration of this bill a pretty significant kind of change put forward by the Minister, which was going to look at a reduction from 16 members to not less than 10 and no more than 14. There had previously, up to that point on the board, been a combination of appointments from both the Australian Education Union and the Independent Education Union, as well as representation from the Association of Independent Schools of South Australia and the Catholic Association of South Australia as well. And as the Minister just outlined, Chair, what is proposed now in this amendment is for the board to consist of not less than 10 and no more than 14 members. And that new composition will include at least 6 practising teachers, with 4 coming from the AEU and 2 from the Independent Education Union. Those 4 positions from the Australian Education Union, as I understand it in this amendment, will include one who is a practising educator in preschool education, one who is a practising educator in primary education, and one who is a practising educator in secondary education. And I am assuming the 4th position, and I will ask a question of the Minister about this in a second, is probably for the union itself to decide who will fill that role. And then there is the 2 Independent Education Union positions, which will be up to that union, I understand, to fill as well. And really the other comment I would like to make is in reference to the work that has been done by these 2 unions in that period between the bill being introduced and where we find ourselves today, Chair. A pretty incredible effort in terms of the petition that was started by those unions, which saw, I think, in the end, 11,606 signatures calling on an amendment like this to reinstate both those unions' representation on the Teachers Registration Board. In any event, I think that is a pretty incredible kind of effort by those unions, but given that that period has been across some of the worst of the COVID pandemic, at least in terms of what we have seen here in South Australia, I think, and all the challenges that were thrown up by that in terms of social distancing, hygiene practices which prevented those union organisers from being able to collect signatures for a petition in the normal way that they would, it's quite remarkable that they still managed to get close to 12,000 people sign that petition. And it would be remiss of me today not to offer my thanks on behalf of the opposition to those 2 unions for the hard yards at the coalface that they have done to push for this change. Yes, I am pleased that the Minister and the Government has come to the table and we have agreed on this amendment, but I think without the huge body of work that was done by those unions to make it clear to both the opposition and the Government that that representation was important and vital and to be maintained, we might not be in the position that we find ourselves in today. So I want to thank all those people who put their name to that petition for making sure their voices are heard. I hope some of them take some pride or solace, I guess, in the fact that in our kind of democracy it is still possible for a petition to have some effect, I think, which is a good thing. A very old-fashioned form of democracy it is too. So I might conclude my remarks there, Chair. Am I now able just to ask a couple of questions of the...
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So just to clarify, if I could, Minister, and I sort of alluded to this in the comments I just made, but in terms of the positions for the Education Union, there are 4 spots that will be provided to them. 3 are for preschool, primary and secondary. Is it right that the 4th position, the union will be able to decide who that person is without the conditions that apply to the other 3 positions?
Yes, I thank the member for the question, and that's his understanding is correct. I should have placed on the record earlier my congratulations to him on the very important role as Shadow Education Minister, and I hope that we have many, many, many years where he's able to fulfil that important role, which I enjoyed previously. I know that he'll do an outstanding body of hard work. And I thank him for the collaborative manner that we've been able to discuss these too. So yes, we were very committed to the proposition that was put to us by a number of people that we should actually ensure that in the teachers that are serving on the Teacher Registration Board, then the different impacts of practice and life in the early childhood years, the primary years and the secondary years should be relevant. The fact that we've settled on, I guess, there being 4 positions from the AEU provides some flexibility for the AEU, however they want to go about their processes, potentially in either having an extra individual on top of those 3 areas of merit who they see fit to put forward, or potentially somebody who represents an area of their membership that they feel is useful to have represented, so long as they are practising teachers who are nominated by the Australian Education Union. And the corresponding question obviously relating to the Independent Education Union, I would hope that there will be collaboration between the unions so that there's also some thought given to the skills matrix, the background matrix of the composition of their suggestions, so that there's a diverse set of experiences on the board. And so, hopefully the IEU and the AEU will give some mind to who the other's nominating, so that there is that diversity. But in as much as the legislation proposes, the IEU will have absolute flexibility to nominate who they would like, so long as they are practising teachers.
Member for Ramsey.
I'd ask a question to the Minister about the remaining members that are actually nominated by the Minister. One must be a legal practitioner and one must be a parent of a school student appointed to represent the community interest. How will you go about seeking that nomination?
So the wording in the bill in relation to those 2 positions reflects the current wording in the current Act, and while it's a matter for Cabinet, who Cabinet considers, I'll give you the hot tip that the people that the member for Port Adelaide nominated to these 2 very positions, I'm going to keep seeing if they're interested for as long as they want to keep doing it.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, we've had, in that back and forward you and I have had, we've had a couple of conversations about what might happen in terms of being able to offer the Independent Schools Association and Catholic Ed Association some kind of voice on that board. I'm wondering if you can sort of shine any light on how you might make sure that those 2 very important employer groups who cover a very large working sector of our school sector will make sure they can still be heard in terms of this board.
Yes, sorry, I want, in the interest of answering the member quickly, I think I captured the essence of the question. If I miss anything, I hope the Chair won't hold us to the 3 members rule if that would otherwise provide. But I am keen for there to be a little bit of flexibility in the other nominations. Our government has a tendency to prefer smaller boards to start with, so when we're ensuring that the skills that are necessary for the board to function very effectively will be met, we're starting with 6 positions being locked up for those nominations. 2 people who I think everyone member in the House, and certainly anyone in the education portfolio, would have a strong understanding of the need for a legal practitioner and the need for a parent representative to be definitely locked away as positions, and then you have a chair and potentially between 1 and 5 other people on the board to fill off the rest of the skills matrix. And there's certain things that are useful on a board, but the position of employers of teachers is certainly a high-level priority. Now, at the moment, the board is very large, and I would say so large as to reduce the impact of its functionality. And so one of the things we're looking to do is reduce the size of the board, but ensuring that those representative bodies, those bodies such as the Catholic Education SA, the Association of Independent Schools of South Australia, and indeed the Department for Education, which is of course the largest employer of teachers in South Australia, are given every opportunity to put nominations forward. They are in the list of designated entities at Schedule 1. Now, there are indeed 24 designated entities. It goes up to X. I'm pretty sure that's 24. Had some cause in recent times to be thinking about these things. So there are 24 designated entities. What tends to happen when boards call for nominations from designated entities is that some will thank you for the letter and decline to make a suggestion. Some will make a series of suggestions. Some will put forward a case for one person. Sometimes you get 5 different letters making a case for the same person. Now, this isn't going to be a representative board, but I think that as a matter of principle, it will be useful for any Minister for Education to take into account that employer bodies, the Department and the Independent and the Catholic schools, do have obviously a significant interest in these issues, so their nominations will be taken very seriously, as will all nominations, but I think it would be a likely outcome that at least one of the employer bodies would most likely you would want in most circumstances to suggest the Cabinet and the Governor's consideration that somebody of that background be nominated. But I think that given that we're trying to reduce the size of the board while at the same time putting in place 6 locked-in positions for the unions, it was certainly my view that you want to provide a bit of flexibility there rather than prescribing who has those remaining couple of spots.
Deputy Leader.
Thank you very much. And I would like to follow up on that question about the absence of the representation that currently, excuse me, that is currently in the legislation. And as the Minister will be aware, we on this side sought to both fulfil the desire to see a smaller board and to make sure that there were people around the table who were part of those organisations. So we, in our suggested amendment, suggested combining the Catholic Education and the Independent Schools Association to have one between them, and then someone from, of course, the Education Department, which, as the Minister points out, is the largest employer of teachers in the state. Now, there's been obviously some negotiations and a determination that we won't seek to insist on that. Although I think we may, should there be a restoration and a reversal of the roles, I think the Shadow Minister's indicated that he'd be interested in having another look at that in the legislation. But my question is, and I appreciate a lot of the detail that you've just given there, Minister, how will, should you determine that the positions that you have ultimate discretion over are not filled by anyone who's associated with management or leadership in those 3 organisations, how will you ensure that those organisations are kept closely informed about what's occurring at the Teachers Registration Board level and have an avenue to provide input on what they're seeing in the trends of teacher employment and indeed in education?
Look, I thank the member for the question and also indicate that in relation to the universities, I think with the other group that the opposition had previously suggested should continue to have nomination. The Vice-Chancellor's Committee remains one of the designated bodies in the way that I described earlier. I think that the point that the member makes in asking the question probably, it's a good one, but it probably underlines one of the reasons why I'm keen for us to focus on having a skills base for the board rather than the remainder of the members who aren't union nominees only considering themselves as there to represent necessarily the interests of a particular group. And I think that when we're talking about the public schools, Catholic schools and the independent sector, there is much that those 3 employer bodies have in common, and there are many different circumstances that are unique in any of those. So I don't think it will be possible for one person to effectively gather all of the information from those 3 anyway. And if we were to accept the principle, which is certainly this government's view, that 16 or 18 is too large, and it's the feedback that I've had from many who have been on the board too, then you have to look at the engagement the Teachers Registration Board as a whole has with those employer groups. Now, every registrar, and certainly Dr. Lind, and Leonie Paulson, who are the 2 that I've had the privilege of dealing with, and every chair, and Dr. Lomax Smith of this chamber's memory is the current chair and has been since I've been the minister. They would both engage regularly with those employers. I think that the passage of this legislation with no longer having those representative members of the board would probably incentivise them to do so more, and I think that that would be welcomed by all of the employer groups. The engagement that the Teacher Registration Board has, of course, is on behalf of all teachers in South Australia, and I think that the positive collaboration between the board and the employer organisations is critical to its functioning. Having members who are on the board whose duty is to the board as nominees of the organisation, I don't think necessarily adds value to the processes that they can put in place through the registrars, the chairs and other members of the TRB's engagement with the employer organisations.
No further questions? If there are no further questions, the question before the Chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council and agrees to the amendment standing in the name of the Minister for Education. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. That's agreed to. Well done. Now,
The second question is that amendment number 2.
well, do you have to move that? Yes.
Assembly agree with amendment number 2 made by the Legislative Council. Amendment number 2 seeks to modify clause 7 to insert a provision requiring the Minister to, as best as practical, ensure gender balance on the Teachers Registration Board. Pardon me. The Government will support this amendment, noting it reflects the general government policy of ensuring gender balance on government boards where practicable.
Member for Wright, wishing to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions for the Minister. Minister, I guess what kind of commitment, if I can use that word, can you provide to the House about how you will use the remaining positions that will be appointed at your discretion to ensure that that gender balance is actually maintained? Can you give us any insight into what you might be able to do towards ensuring parities?
Thank the member for the question, and as much as practical is an important part of it, because of course the member may recall, I suspect that some of his colleagues do recall, that this is in the existing legislation and has been more honoured in the breach in this board than the observance, for the simple reason, of course, that with all of these people being nominated, there's limited impact that the Minister can have. And the Chair being the key role that the Minister has continued to have the opportunity to influence. The current Chair appointed, Dr Lomax Smith, is a woman. The board is mostly women. And so there have been incidents in the past where gender equity on the board was indeed not taken up to its full extent, but I don't think that that was a mistake, because I think Dr Lomax Smith was a good appointment in this role, and I think that she's done a good job. So, I know. Well, in this case, representation of men is what is sought if you talk about gender equity. The simple fact is that across government, we are committed to ensuring there is as much gender equity as possible. One of the key reasons for that is that and I'm pleased that we have as many women in our cabinet as there were in the last Labor cabinet as well. We would like to see more. We'd like to see more women role models across society in all sorts of ways. People in positions of prestige, and that's a commitment that our government has, to seek to have equality in numbers of women on government boards. That's a great outcome. Now, of course, there are certain fields of endeavour where many of the people who are eligible for appointment to these things, a majority may indeed be men, and there are certain where a majority may be women. So I guess the caveat I would put on the search for gender equity on this board is that the truth is a significant majority of the number of people who are appropriate and eligible for these positions, if we are talking about the highest flyers in many areas of education, there are more women than men that work in this area. And there are more women than men who have been appointed to this board in the past. And while we would seek to ensure, as the former Shadow Minister pointed out when we were discussing this debate last time, that the proposition of gender equity on the Teachers Registration Board might indeed have the perverse impact of reducing the number of women in high positions in government. I don't want to see that, but it does send a reminder to us to reflect on the fact that there are questions raised by a number of people in the community about boys' education, and there are certainly areas in our schools where the workforce balance in certain schools is so significantly lopsided in gender that the need for male role models in those schools is important. I think on the board that's probably less important, but nevertheless, and there's also the question to reflect on as to whether all the positions become vacant at once, because it's quite often in a board somebody will resign, create a vacancy, get appointed for 3 years, so they're not always going to come up at the same time. We're not going to have any control over who the unions nominate. So will I commit to guarantee to there being us appointing more men to this board? No, but it will be a constant reminder for us, as much as practicable, to ensure that there are men on the board. There should be some men on the board at all times. I think there always has been, but I would want to see some gender diversity reflected there. I certainly would not want a good female candidate to miss out on a position just by a result of her gender.
No further questions. In that case, the question before the chair is that the committee agrees to amendment number 2. All those in favour, say aye. Those against, say no. It's carried and agreed to. Well done. Now, amendment number 3, Minister.
Thank you, sir. I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 3 made by the Legislative Council and instead makes the following amendment as tabled in my name. Amendment number 3 removes clause 8(2) of the Government's bill that sets out that the Governor may appoint a person to be the deputy of one of the 4 specified members appointed to the board under clause 7 of the bill. This returns arrangements for deputies to that set out in the Teachers Registration Standards Act 2004, which enables deputies to be appointed in respect of all board members. The Government disagrees with this amendment. The Government does not see the need for the appointment of a deputy for every member on the board as current practice. It is important, however, that provision be retained for a small number of deputy members to be appointed to the board to ensure the board is availed the expertise of practising teachers and a legal practitioner in the temporary absence of relevant board members with that expertise. Therefore, the Government has proposed an alternative amendment in lieu of amendment number 3.
No questions. In that case, the question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council, amendment number 3, and agrees to the amendment in lieu thereof standing in the Minister's name. Is that clear? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. That's carried. Well done. Minister.
Sir, in relation to amendment number 4, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with this amendment, number 4, made by the Legislative Council. Amendment number 4 would require the Teachers Registration Board to conduct a survey of registered teachers on the curriculum for initial teacher education in this state and the quality and effectiveness of initial teacher education in this state generally. The survey would have to be completed at least once in every 5 years, and a report on the results would have to be provided to the Minister and tabled in both Houses of Parliament. The bill already provides the board the function to undertake research relating to the teaching profession, and this could extend to the seeking the views of registered teachers on the quality and effectiveness of initial teacher education. I would hope that members might be persuaded that given that we have given the unions 6 guaranteed spots and 50% of the board at least, I think in practice the way it's set out, it'll usually be more than 50% of the board will indeed be registered practising teachers, then that should comfort any in the teaching profession who might have suggested this original amendment, that it might not be needed, that the interests of the teachers of South Australia are guaranteed to be represented at board level, so they don't need this protection, which would impose, I suppose, some constriction on the other flexibility that the board would have to do the research that it wants to undertake, that it sees as being high value, high impact research that it might want to undertake instead.
Any comments on amendment number 4? No, we're all good with that. So the question is that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. the Assembly disagrees. Now, Minister, just so I'm clear, are you wanting to deal with each of these individually?
I do. I think that there is enough. I think that it would benefit members who might be reflecting on this in the other chamber to have the reasons as to why the government is preferring not to pursue their amendments. So I'd like to briefly explain rather than moving them on block. If that's all right.
Perfectly fine.
Now, we're on amendment number 5, are we? So in relation to amendment number 5, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council. Amendment number 5 sets out that if a teacher pays their annual fee for registration in advance for the full term of registration, the board must reduce the amount payable by at least 5%. The setting of the annual fee for registration and provision for it to be paid up front will be set out in regulations under the Teachers Registration and Standards Act 2004. The board has yet to advise the government of its recommended annual fee and any associated arrangements. The government is not inclined to fix a discount on a fee not yet recommended or prescribed. A clear benefit of paying the annual registration fee up front for the full term of registration would that a registered teacher would not be subject to any adjustment to the annual fee that may occur over the course of registration period, such as an adjustment in line with CPI, for example. So the benefit sought by this amendment is in effect something that would provide a discount to somebody for paying up front on what would already in effect be a discount on the fact that if they pay every year, 1 year at a time, then they will be subject to whatever increases happen in the fee 1 year at a time. And that yearly payment is a new feature that would be allowed here, whereas having the full payment up front, you would already get around the impact of any of those CPI increases, for example, that might happen every year. So there is already some level of discount, and to provide a further discount to those who are paying up front, of course, this is a board whose costs are covered by its fees, and so the impact of providing a further discount would only be to increase the costs for those teachers who potentially aren't in a position to pay their full fee up front, and we don't think that that is reasonable, and I think that the Teacher Registration Board has outlined why it's also impractical.
All good. The question before the committee is that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment number 5 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. The House disagrees with the amendment. Minister.
Thank you. In relation to amendment number 6, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 6. Amendment number 6 removes reference to adopting codes of conduct or publishing or adopting professional standards from the new section 31B that is to be inserted by clause 26 of the bill. The government opposes this amendment. New section 31B provides for the board to publish or adopt codes of conduct and professional standards. If the board, following consultation with teachers and other relevant stakeholders, determined that it should adopt an existing code of conduct or professional standard under the Act, rather than developing and publishing one itself, it should be able to do so. The board already, in effect, adopts the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers in South Australia. The new Section 31B will formally recognise the board's role in adopting these standards.
Questions? No. If not, the question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 6 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. The House of Assembly disagrees with Amendment 6. Minister.
Sir, in relation to Amendment number 7, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council. Amendment number 7 provides for any code of conduct published by the board under the new Section 31B to be subject to Sections 10 and 10A of the Subordinate Legislation Act 1978. Under these sections, a code of conduct would have to be laid before the Parliament, considered by the Legislative Review Committee, and could be disallowed by resolution of either House of Parliament. I do not believe that there is any benefit that would arise from allowing the Parliament to disallow a code of conduct published by the board after consultation with the profession and other relevant stakeholders, and so the government seeks the concurrence of the House and the Council to disagree with the amendment.
Any questions? If not, the question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 7 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. The House of Assembly disagrees with Amendment 7.
Sir,
Minister.
in relation to amendment number 8, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council. It is consequential to amendment number 6, and so therefore the reasons for opposing amendment number 6 apply equally here.
Put the question straight away. The question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 8 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. The House of Assembly disagrees with amendment 8. Minister.
Sir, in relation to amendment number 9, I move that the House of Assembly disagrees with the amendment made by the Legislative Council. Amendment number 9 proposes to further modify new section 31B to include a requirement for the Teachers Registration Board to undertake consultation with specified stakeholders prior to publishing a code of conduct. The government supports the notion that the board should undertake consultation in relation to publishing or adopting new codes of conduct or professional standards, and the presiding member and the registrar of the board have indicated that it would absolutely be their intention to do so administratively. They give that commitment. They gave it to the Shadow Minister, they've given it to me, and on their behalf I'm sure they won't mind me sharing that with other members of Parliament. The process, however, proposed under the amendment, as suggested by the Legislative Council, is unlikely to be practical in all circumstances, particularly as there are no exceptions to the requirement to consult in relation to even any minor amendments or corrections to a code or standard that may be needed from time to time. I reiterate that we are talking about a proposition where the code of conduct is supervised by the Teachers Registration Board, a body of people who now includes, if the amendments are passed as suggested, direct representation from the unions, so their interests should be understood, and indeed the expectation is that they will be consulted on widely. So we request, I know that certainly the government supports the motion that the House of Assembly disagree with this amendment.
Okay, so the question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 9 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. All those in favour say aye. Thank you. Those against say no. That's carried. Amendment number 9 is disagreed to. Amendment number 10, Minister.
Sir, in relation to amendment number 10 is another amendment that is consequential on amendment number 6. I explained the reasons why the government supports the disagreement with that amendment, and they may be again read in relation to amendment number 10.
Any questions? No. If not, the question before the chair is that the House of Assembly disagrees with amendment number 10 made by the Legislative Council. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. That's carried. Amendment number 10 is disagreed to. The committee has considered the amendments referred to it and had agreed to amendment number 2 without amendment, has disagreed to amendments numbers 4 to 10, and disagreed to amendments numbers 1 and 3, and made amendments in lieu thereof. That was quite a mouthful.